My name is Arya Majumdar. I study and teach at the Jindal Global University. I've been here for 5 years. I serve as the Director for Academic Planning, Coordination and Interdisciplinarity, as well as Executive Director for the Office of Rankings, Benchmarking and Institutional Transformation. I'd like to introduce my panel. Starting from my left, we have Ms. Tehseen Khande, who's the Solution Sales Manager for Elsevier South Asia. Dr. Yugank Goyal, who is a faculty member at JSLH and Deputy Director IHED. Dr. Karthik Sridhar, Vice Chairman, Indian Center for Academic Rankings and Excellence, and Mr. Ritin Malhotra, Regional Director, South Asia for Times Higher Education. The format of this panel is going to be directed questions initially for each speaker, and then we can sort of flow the conversation into a more open discussion between panelists and attendees. Let me start with Dr. Sridhar. Now, all ranking agencies use specific parameters to figure out rankings year on year, right? I'd like to ask you, to what extent are these parameters effective in capturing the essence of research or teaching excellence in universities or in higher education?
Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, thank you very much for inviting us for this August gathering. A lot has been spoken in the last 24 to 36 odd hours since yesterday. We've been speaking a lot, and this morning I had the honor of driving down with Professor Khalid from the Cindrella guest house to this campus. So we had a good hour and a half of discussions and brainstorming on what should this session cover. So we said, why don't we speak about some of the things that have been not essentially covered in great detail in the past day. So I put on some quick thoughts while I was driving down. One, of course, opening remarks. Quality, being the very soul of higher education institution, can be characterized as the following. One, quality is a rather complex and elusive concept. Quality is mostly noticed, unfortunately, by its absence. Many times when there is quality, we don't really notice it, but when it's not there, we say there is an absence of quality. Quality of education institutions is as difficult to quantify or measure as any other qualities like honesty, integrity, or simplicity. No scale or instrument is available in order to measure quality of education institutions. Hence, we need to appropriately strategize benchmarks and benchmark-related parameters. And hence, the session becomes, while it is at the fag end of a day and a half, the session becomes that much more important, is because if quality is going to be assessed in terms of data by ranking agencies, can we use that data to benchmark with the ones who are doing fairly well and see in which direction we need to move? And lastly, there's a nice quote. It says, quality doesn't cost you anything. It is an attitude of the mind. And higher education institutions with quality should be allergic to mediocrity. So if we can, in India and rest of the world, move our universities to that direction, I think we would have achieved a fair bit of quality within our institutions. Moving quickly into the presentation. So it's important to understand, while we speak so much about quality, a little bit of data to the table, particularly from an Indian higher education point of view. Indian higher education size and scale, it's important for our colleagues who are not from India also to understand what is the scale at which we are speaking, because in the morning we had a breakfast meeting with Raj and some of the other colleagues who are not from India, and they spoke about why aren't your accreditation institutions able to do what we did in the Middle East. Accreditation institutions keep us on our toes in the Middle East, and I made a comment to Raj that many of the regulators in our country keep us on our knees. So it is a big difference between keeping them on their toes and keeping us on our knees. India is the third largest higher education system after US and China. We have a little over 900 plus universities, 40,000 odd colleges, 11,000 standalone institutions. Our universities, again, are classified into institutions of national importance, central universities, state universities, deemed universities, state private universities. We also have, Professor Khalid, a connotation called the doomed universities. And then you have a range of universities which fall in the bracket of fake universities. I recently was at a university in Lucknow, which is called the Abdul Kalam Technical University, and that has a huge campus, I think about 30 acres of campus with no single student. And that's a university which is a completely affiliating university system. The 20 acres is only for administrative purposes. Not a single student ever enters the gate of that university. And then you have a DU which has constituent colleges, may not have an affiliating structure. So in such a complex system, how do you have ranking agencies measure 900 plus universities? Is not necessarily possible. We will only have islands of excellence, and it's important to have those islands of excellence as well. Not everybody can be in Olympics, but some of the ones who can run better, if they can achieve gold, it's national pride and prestige. So we'll need to strike the right balance. 50% of our population is under the age of 25, and that population is increasing. There is a huge demand-supply gap in higher education in the country today. Our enrollment in higher education is upwards of 35.7 million students at this given point in time. This is more than the population of many small nations. We've been speaking a lot about gross enrollment rate. India's gross enrollment rate as on 2017 is 25.2, which means if you have 100 students who are eligible in terms of age to get access to education, only 25 of them are able to get into higher education. That number in China is close to 50, in US is upwards of 85. The government of India has a vision, and the vision is to move the GER to 30, which means an additional 5% GER will ensure that we in India need physically 800 plus universities and 40,000 more colleges, which is not going to be possible in the time that we all survive on this planet. So which means technology in education is going to become a big enabler. We spoke about accreditation, Professor Khalid. In India, until recently, accreditation was not mandatory. It was a voluntary exercise. If you want to showcase to the world that you are a quality institution, you may want to apply for accreditation. Now it's become mandatory. As we speak, less than 10% of the institutions in our country are accredited by NAC and NBA. NAC is an institutional level accreditation, NBA is a program level accreditation. And of course, we still have the affiliated university structure, with some of our universities having more than 1,000 plus colleges. By the time the Vice Chancellor's term gets over, he has not even visited 10% of these colleges in total. Given this complexity, rankings continue to become more and more popular, more and more powerful, more and more useful, and there is a global debate on the need for rankings. And I think at some point in time, towards the end of today, we should rest that argument and say rankings are going to be here for a long, long time. They're going to stay. We can't close our eyes and wish them away. And the number of students who travel outside their home country between the years 2000 and 2012 has doubled from 2.1 million to 4.5 million. Which means over 50 lakh students travel outside their home country for the single most decision of their lives. And if you're going to be in Haryana with 50 plus universities, 40 universities, you want to know which is the #1 university for law, and then you would come to OP Gentle. So these students want to look at a list. Stakeholders are looking at a list. Parents want to know, employers want to know, where do we go for hiring the best lawyers? If that is the situation globally, look at India. Close to 37 lakh students have migrated within India in the past decade. And maximum number of student migration is happening to Karnataka and then to Maharashtra. Maximum number of students are leaving the states of Uttar Pradesh and West Bengal. And within the states is Uttar Pradesh and Maharashtra at #1 and 2, where maximum students are migrating within the state. Students are getting out of towns and villages and going into cities. So massive migration for higher education happening in our country and globally. Rankings are going to become even more popular, even more useful. And there is a responsibility on ranking agencies to ensure that they bring out the best of the information for the benefit of everybody. Student, of course, in any market, whether it's India or outside, generic marketing messages. Every institution calling themselves #1. India has over 900 universities. At least 100 universities are on rank 1. Either a Times Higher Education, world ranking, subject rankings, within the subject and object ranking. Within that subject, you have a state ranking, city ranking, and now you have a city and a state and a country rating system put together by a ranking agency. Who is the real #1? So that's the confusion, and there is information overload. Rankings, of course, have a lot of criticisms. At one end, they call inevitable, simple, useful, powerful. At the other end, you have people who call them biased, dangerous. But if we, in developing countries like India, can look at rankings as a mirror, as a benchmarking tool, and say if this is where I was last year. Can I use this data, put together my roadmap, and see in which direction can I move? So I think the last session, we looked at one particular university which put together a ranking goal that they want to achieve in X number of years, which I think is a good direction. But if that ranking goals can be broken down into research, teaching, faculty with PhD, so on and so forth, if we can micromanage those aspects of quality, we should be able to move in the right direction. We spoke a lot about ranking agencies and the variety of ranking agencies in the world. At this given point in time, over a dozen ranking agencies exist, and each of them wanting you to give out data. So institutions, forward-looking institutions like OP General have put together the right strategy to set up a separate office for putting together a ranking. In fact, Raj and I have been visiting the offices of the President and the Prime Minister to make this almost mandatory in every institution of the country. Particularly, Raj and I were also involved in recommending to the President, the 13th President, President Shri Pranab Mukherjee, on making it mandatory for every central university to provide data. Thanks to Raj's leadership, that's happened in the country. In fact, Raj has also been vocal about creating a national rankings, which we took to Prime Minister's office. It's important that such initiatives are undertaken in India, but we should also look at the global scenario. The first modern world rankings began in 2003, when the then Chinese government decided to benchmark its universities with the rest of the world. It did not intend to put together a ranking, but it wanted to know where are our universities when benchmarked. The task was given to a university. Let me tell you, if one such initiative was done in India, you'll have another private university go and take a stay order on that. But here is a university in China, the Shanghai Jiatong University, which popularly put together the Shanghai Jiatong rankings in 2003, spoke about universities in the Western world. The European universities seemed to fare very, very well. This created quite an uproar in UK. So two organizations called QS and Times Higher Education came together to put together an answer to the Chinese ranking, which came about in 2004. 2009, Ritin will speak about this in greater detail. QS and Times Higher Education split because Times Higher Education believed that they will now need to create a ranking which is far more detailed with different sets of parameters, and the parameters that QS is putting together is not necessarily in great detail. So THE now has a new ranking framework. Moving very quickly, let's look at the different ranking system parameters. This is something that's not been covered since yesterday. I think we have Yugank who's coming and speaking about the outcome of these parameters, and hence to take you through these parameters is very important. The academic ranking of world universities, or the Shanghai rankings, looks at the size of the university, the total number of students divided by the total number of faculty to come to the faculty-student ratio. It looks at articles cited in Science and Social Science Citation Index, a group of 60-odd high-quality journals which are very, very reputed. India still hasn't gone to that level. Of course, Yatin and Tehseen will give us the numbers. Articles in Nature and Science, the presence of highly cited researchers on campus, faculty and alumni awards. Unfortunately, they don't look at our Padma Shri, Padma Bhushan, Padma Vibhushan, and Bharat Ratna. They look at the Nobel Prizes. They also look at the field medal. A field medal is only given the space of mathematics to a faculty member who's under 40 years of age. Most of our institutions have an average age of 50 plus for faculty members, except for institutions like OPJ, very, very young, bright talent. QS and Times are children of the same mother in the real sense. They were born together. Of course, Times Higher, the ranking system has evolved over a period of time. QS continues to stay there with citations per faculty, internationalization in terms of students and faculty on campus, faculty-student ratio, and a very, very heavy emphasis on reputation, on a perception score. So 50% of a QS ranking is based on data, another 50% is based on subjectivity, reputation. It's undertaken by a survey about which I'll speak. Times, fortunately, looks at innovation and international outlook, research, citations, and teaching. Times, the weightage on reputation is about 33%, as against 50 in QS. The QS World Ranking, as I said, 50% is on reputation, 50% on data. And the World Rankings only looks at citations per faculty. Paper productivity, research paper productivity, the total number of research papers produced by a university is not taken into account. The focus is not on productivity, but on quality. The total number of citations produced by the university's papers divided by the total number of faculty on campus. So if you have a large faculty base who do not produce, and you have few faculty members who are producing most of your papers, your citations per faculty score will go down. And this is what is happening at most of our Indian institutions. Of course, Yatin spoke about these numbers. He spoke about the numbers from 2013 to 17. This is 11 to 16, and his numbers post progress, so which is good. We've published about 6.5 lakh odd papers, giving us about 2 million citations. 2017 data speaks about 3 million citations. We were at 3.2 citations per document. His figure speaks about 4.8, which means there is progress. International collaborations, as Yagnik said, is still very, very low. Only 17% of our papers in the country have an international collaboration. I'm sure at OPJ the numbers will be very, very high. As a nation, we are debating on the topic of employability being a challenge. Yes. Only 0.8% of our papers across 6.5 lakh odd publications is put together with an industry. And if that's less than 1%, employability is going to continue to be a challenge. We will need to collaborate a lot with industry. Now, many a times good performance continues to lead to poor rankings, and hence this debate that ranking agencies do not necessarily count and take into things that are difficult to count. They like to take into things that are very easily available, comparable, very easily achievable, and that's data. So if you look at India, on a GDP purchasing power parity terms, on research output, on quality and patents, we are far better than South Korea, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Unfortunately, we have only 3 universities in the top 200 of the QS World University Rankings, whereas Hong Kong has 5, Singapore has 2, Australia has about 8. So India will have to really put together its act into place and ensure that data is made available, and then using data you can do a lot more. Very, very important for QS and Times Higher to have a look at this. 2.3% of 75,000 respondents in the QS 2018 academic response have said they have knowledge of India. So less than 1,700 people in the world have said they have knowledge on India. Most of them only know India in Delhi, India as in Taj Mahal, and India as in IITs. Professor Khalid is visiting Taj Mahal very soon, and he's not visiting an IIT. So India as in IIT, so the minute you say I on the QS survey, so some of you have taken the survey, you get every institution under the planet in India with I, and then you select 10 of them. So the survey says you need to select 10 within your country, you can't select your own institution, and you need to select 30 outside your country. So what you do, you have top of the mind recall. I met Professor Rensburg, I would speak about Johannesburg, South Africa. So these are challenges that ranking agency will need to look at. Just 2 more minutes and I'll finish. The average age of a university in the top 25 of the world university ranking is 241. India has a long way to go. We have just begun. So the debate that can India be in the top 100 will continue to go. We will have to keep progressing that direction. There is no immediate answer to this. This is what we will suggest institutions do. This is what we did for a public university in India which participated in the NIRF India rankings. So we put together a very detailed analysis, data by data, parameter by parameter. Where is this university? On the right side, you will see capital expenditure of a state public university says 0. The Vice Chancellor had no idea that the finance department did not give this number to a ranking agency. So this is what universities will have to do with data. Just by keeping data in-house is not going to work. Once you know what your score is, please go back and find out why haven't you achieved that rank. Very, very quickly, knowledge is very, very important. Complete knowledge of all the parameters, sensitization from doorman to chairman. I can tell you, OPG is one of the very few institutions I have seen where there is complete autonomy given to everybody in terms of data, but also a seriousness where right from Raj, everybody down below has an understanding that we need to move that direction. I've seen this in very, very few institutions. Some of the others that I've seen is BITS Pilani and Manipal. So you guys will really need to pat yourselves on the back. Chances are you will become the next IOE. Very, very quickly, data, proactive collection of authentic and quality data. We need to have a nodal officer. In IIT Delhi, one of the years, they fell down in a QS ranking because a gentleman who got retired 3 years back was sitting at his home giving data to a ranking agency. Ranking agency had no idea this data is coming from somebody who's crossed 60 and is retired in the system. IIT Delhi, for your information. So that's the reason Raj and I had to go and knock at the doors of Rashtrapati Bhavan, beg, borrow, steal, and bring a mandate that it is important for us to have a nodal officer in every central university whose responsibility is to give data and timely submission of data. In India, we have so many festivals. We have more holidays and working days. So Diwali hai, Holi hai, we don't give data. So timely submission of data, ranking agencies don't have time. They work with about 2,000 plus institutions globally. And then finally, action. What do you do when you get a score? You go and put it on the newspaper and you rejoice, you enjoy, all that is fine, but you will need to do an internal analysis of the results. Why am I at 43 and not at 35? What do I do with the result? Benchmarking with peers. Whom do I look up to in this particular segment? Where are they and where am I? And a roadmap for improvement in the next cycle. Challenges with our universities, research, publication, name variations. One university called the Pune University suddenly changed its name to Savitribai Phule Pune University. Savitribai Phule is a great reformer, woman reformer professor, but unfortunately we didn't think about her 50 years back when she was there. We thought of her today. Pune University didn't do anything to tell the world that my name has changed. THE will still go back, LCOV will still go back and search in the older name, and that will produce poor rankings, poor results. So we will need to do we'll need to put together all the name variations under one umbrella, work with Elsevier, tell them I'm also known by 20 different names, I publish in 20 different names, and only then you will have all your paper productivity under one bucket. Asian websites in a modern world, your website is the most important, like a Connaught Place real estate property, but what do we use it for? There's a tender for a gas stove, tender for a gas cylinder. The tender that was put for a gas cylinder is cancelled this week. You have a holiday coming up, so on and so forth. Very difficult to find data in any website in our country. Poor social media presence, I don't have to say that. Nobody knows how many alumni Delhi University have. Even the Vice Chancellor has no idea. One of them is sitting here who's Raj, who only speaks to Delhi University. I don't see many alumni connecting back to the university. Finally, resistance to collaboration within the country. And I'm done. There's no one solution for us to do well. Everything is intertwined with the other, but we as India and some of the developing nations can focus on papers and citations. I think everything else will start falling into place. We need to do what the ISRO did. This is an amazing image that I will leave you back with. 2014, the New York Times painted the picture of an Indian space scientist with a cow, the poor old man knocking the doors of the elite space club wanting to enter. 2017, we had 103 satellites going into space. Most of them, 90% of them were satellites of other countries. We sent our Mars orbiter to the Mars, cheaper than what Hollywood spent to make a movie called Gravity on space. Today, we are sitting inside very, very comfortably, but India is the same humble man with his cow. He's happy being there. He's benchmarked with NASA, and he's made it happen with lesser budgets than NASA. Many of our universities are going that direction. OPJ definitely is one of them that I'm very, very proud of. And very soon, some of us will make it to the world rankings. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry for extending.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Karthik, for that. You're from THE, right? To begin with, there's this debate about whether you can actually quantify quality in education, particularly higher education. That's a separate debate by itself. But assuming that it's reasonably unquantifiable, how does a ranking agency such as THE, what role does it play in the improvement of quality in higher education?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Raj and the team at Cindrella for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. Now, talking about the role of the rankings and how do we try to quantify something which may not be quantifiable. I think if I talk about the role of rankings at the outset, a couple of things I would like to say is that rankings are not meant to be an end in itself, but more as a means towards supporting the institutions in their journey towards excellence. And that's how all higher education institutes should view rankings as such. Karthik talked about looking at rankings as a tool for benchmarking, and that essentially what they are. The second aspect I want to point out is that there's no single ranking framework which is able to really capture, or there's no perfect system as it stands today that can capture all aspects of an institution. That's why it is also important to recognize that for higher education institutes, there are different institutions with different missions. And that's where we, on our side, we try to quantify looking at different frameworks which can adequately try to capture the excellence of the institutions according to their different respective missions. Now, if we look at the different missions of the leading universities around the world, I've just handpicked a few, but of course, there are more than 20,000 institutions around the world. What we observe is that there are primarily 3 areas of focus. Either one is focusing on development of research and how that research can contribute to the challenges in the society and the nation that the institutes operate in. Second would be more in terms of creating knowledge and disseminating knowledge and providing quality education for the students and how they can develop in their lives by coming out of the universities. And third is making a contribution to the society and the contribution of the institutions in nation and development building. Now, a lot of aspects Karthik already talked about, but I'll just point out a few aspects which we believe that definitely rankings can play a role. One is in terms of really providing a mirror for self-assessment and institutional mechanism for accountability to society. What we have observed over the last few years, by the whole process of just participating in the ranking process, it does create a kind of culture of transparency and healthy competition, which is good, because if you look at even across different industries, there's always some order of ranking or the other, and it does spur the companies to innovate better, to work harder, to look at different areas of improvement. And that is something, some of the benefits that rankings in general can bring to higher education as well. And we have also seen that, especially with the introduction of the national ranking frameworks, there has been a better culture of quality assurance among the Indian higher education institutes. And this is something that can play a supporting role in achieving the different missions that the universities would have in different forms of excellence. And this is how some of the different stakeholders have been viewing the rankings as well, in terms of helping them set objective targets to support the different aspects that they should be working towards, and in terms of identifying potential, even at the highest levels of the governments. In terms of the students itself, we all know that globalization is there. The number of international students in terms of mobility has been rising over the last few years. And in the last decade or so, we have already seen emerging economies like China, Russia, Japan, in terms of the students' bodies who are coming out. So there's a lot that they have to look at in terms of which international institute that they should be studying at. So in that sense, in terms of providing a kind of a framework and a benchmark, rankings do play a role. Now coming to in terms of how can we measure excellence. So we believe that there are 3 areas that universities work towards. One is from a research emphasis, so in terms of creating knowledge to address the world's problems. Stewardship in terms of managing resources, teaching, and quality of teaching in general. And the third is in terms of impact on society. So what on our side we have tried to do is to create different frameworks to address each of these. As I said, there is no perfect framework as it is, but you have to start somewhere. So from a benchmarking point of view, rankings is always a work in progress. And there will definitely be certain aspects which may not be quantifiable, but we definitely try to focus on those which can certainly be quantified, and that can be a stepping stone in helping and supporting the institutions. Now looking at some of the characteristics that were identified by the Ministry of Education here in terms of the institutions of eminence, some of the unique characteristics that they identified in terms of having quality of teaching and research, having a good proportion of foreign students, having good faculty-student ratio, having engagement in research in terms of the faculty, having financially sound, so a lot of backing in terms of the institution so that they can invest in appropriate resources, having good collaborations, as well as engagement in the society. So we have developed different frameworks. For example, the World University Ranking was primarily designed to look at those institutions which have a mission towards research, or a greater focus on research and their impact on the development of the nation and the society. So that's where, in terms of the quantifiable measures, we came up with this framework after a year-long consultation with leading academics around the world. So looking at aspects on the research, citations, international outlook, industry income, and then we came up with this 13 detailed metrics that goes into looking at different aspects. Now, if I were to map these with most of the qualities which the ministry identified for institutions of eminence, we find that each of these different metrics do map onto at one level or the other. Now, this is focusing more towards the research-led institutions. So in that sense, it does not really cover some of the other aspects that institutions continuously work towards. So looking at some of the subject levels, we also look at different disciplines as well to really try to capture the work that the institutions are doing in different disciplines. Now, coming to the second aspect in terms of the teaching aspect. So this model was developed by John Biggs. He's a famous sociologist from Australia. And he talked about the quality of teaching at universities. And he came up with this framework talking about the presage, process, and product, the 3 Ps, where how looking at different factors in terms of the students' current knowledge, coming up with learning-focused activities, how it can really create learning outcomes, some things which can help in the development of the skills of the students when they graduate from the institutions. So for our side to capture some of the metrics which can quantify how teaching, some of the second mission that we identified can, how the institutions are doing. So we did come up with a different framework from the World University Rankings. So we recently launched the European Teaching Rankings, and before that we had done the Teaching Excellence Framework in together with the Wall Street Journal in the US. So we did try to map some of the different aspects in terms of the resource utilization, engagement, outcomes, as well as environment. And again, after a discussion with the academics around the world, we came up with this framework as well to try to quantify certain aspects in terms of the quality of education at different institutes. Of course, for us, the ideal objective is to come up with comparators which can be compared across the global level. But there are a lot of challenges that we do face, certainly in terms of the teaching. So because different countries do have different dynamics, and it's strictly quite difficult to compare one nation with another. So we are still working on a model which we hope eventually we would be reached on a global level for the second mission as well. Now coming at the third mission in terms of really supporting how the universities are able to make an impact on the society. So this is something that we have tried to do for the first time ever in a global context. And this is the first time we are trying to come up with a framework, and currently we are inviting the universities for participating in this framework, which the results will be publishing in April next year. So we do have to see how things turn out. But we are trying to look at this aspect as well, which so far has not been looked at by any ranking agency or in terms of really framework to link the education institutes and their work they're doing in terms of contribution to society. So what we are trying to do here, we are looking at the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, which were published in 2016. And a lot of nations are already on board at a national level to work towards these goals with a 15-year target. So for the first time effort, we are trying to really look at these sustainability development goals, and we have identified 11 out of the 17 sustainability development goals. And we are asking the institutions to submit their information to 4 out of these 17. So this does give a chance to institutes which may not have a focus on research, but are definitely trying to come up with answers to solutions to the society's challenges. And wherever we can, we are trying to use metrics which are quantifiable, and definitely we'll be working together with the institutions over a period of time to improve on the different frameworks. But the key point I would like to drive is that rankings and the quantifiable metrics do play a role in terms of really helping support the key strategies that the universities are looking at and the key missions. And you have to start somewhere. So while everything may not be quantifiable, data is one aspect which we do see can bring a lot of benefits, where by looking at data analysis and keeping it at the core of the direction that the institution should take will definitely help them in achieving their mission as the years and the time go by. And so that's where we are trying to address the different aspects through the different frameworks. Now, so at this point, out of the 11 which we are looking at, the institutions are free to submit the data for any of those 4. Because today's session is not really about talking specific methodology and so on, so I'll keep it at a later discussion. Now, just looking at some of the aspects in terms of what factors can really help Indian institutions in featuring global rankings. As I said, different institutions do have different missions, but if I talk about the current global ranking frameworks, that primarily is the World University Rankings in terms of from a THE perspective, and that focuses primarily on research-led institutions. So in that sense, there are a couple of factors or aspects that the universities can work towards. One of which is definitely looking at building the research capability and the capacity. The second aspect, if I had to really identify, would be one on international outlook. I think everyone is quite well aware that over the last few years, the focus for Indian universities in general has pretty much been inward. But that is something which is now starting to change. And that is one key area in terms of really engaging the international community in terms of more collaborations, having more international faculty, international students, and really having a more global outlook is one aspect which will be a key determinant whether the Indian institutions are able to rise up in the, on a global stage in the years to come.
Well, thank you very much, Ritin. It seems that your original statement that rankings are simply a means to an end and that they should not be taken as an end in itself, that sort of flows in from Karthik's earlier point that it's also very useful to benchmark oneself against one's performance in previous years. I would now like to move towards Ms. Tehseen Khande, who comes to us from Elsevier. Ms. Khande, a university ecosystem is built up of a number of stakeholders. You know, they have university administrators, researchers, students, parents. Specifically for Elsevier, right, and from your background as, you know, a research solutions provider, what could be the considerations that, let's say, a university professor or a university administration, perhaps the policy-making body of a university, what are the considerations that they should keep in mind when taking into account the impact that rankings and benchmarking have?
So firstly, I'd like to thank everyone over here for being present at my session. I hope I'm loud and clear. Yeah, okay, great. So I think I'd really like to start with something which Karthik and Ritin have been mentioning. I think rankings are now the necessary evil in our society. I remember when I joined Elsevier a couple of years back, the general attitude over here was, I don't want to be part of the rankings because I know I am the best, right? So they knew by themselves that they were the best, no matter which institute, which university I walked into. They said, I know I am the best, so why should I be part of this? And I think the change in our environment and the culture of, you know, being part of this ecosystem has really made an impact. I think it's pushed the universities all over, whether they're central universities or state universities, to kind of delve into themselves and have a look into their strengths and weaknesses and try to work upon them. And you can actually see that difference in, you know, Ritin's material where you've gone up from 42 to 49, and I'm sure in the coming years, the number's just going to go on increasing. So I think it's kind of pushed, you know, the internal stakeholders, whether they're researchers, whether they're departments, whether they're the senior management, whether they're policymakers or the funding bodies, all of them to kind of, you know, push themselves towards understanding where these universities are. So again, I think when I start about this, we talked about, you know, how some of these metrics are not really quantifiable, right? But there are definitely research metrics which are quantifiable. So you can actually, these are, I would call, the low-hanging fruits. You can kind of control your research output. Now, how you control is the key then, right? You don't want to, we were talking about the earlier session, you could have lots of publication output, but what is its impact? Karthik mentioned that, right? We could just go on increasing our number, but how is it really impacting the quality? So then I think that's the second most important question, right? So you start off with the low-hanging fruit. So you have to kind of, or the internal stakeholders have to create a short-term and a long-term plan, right? The short-term plan has to be, just to give you an example, KAIST in 2007 decided to put up a development plan in terms of they want to figure in rankings. 2011, they ranked number 40, I think so, in 2011 in the QS World Rankings, and now in 2019, they rank at around 40. So that's the kind of growth they've had, right? So this is what you need to plan it. You need to have a short-term plan in terms of where you want to go ahead as a university, and then you need to have a long-term plan, right? That this is where I want to be. I think these are the couple of metrics you need to work upon and kind of figure out how to take yourself to becoming the next leader, because you can't just become the Harvards like was talked about very often, right? Not everyone is going to be there. So you need to understand what your strengths are, because I think that also comes back to the point when you are looking at collaborations or MOUs, you're not going to just put up a collaboration or an MOU just for the sake of it. You want to make positive impact out of those as well, right? When you are collaborating with the Harvard, let's say OP Jindal is collaborating with Harvard, what is the impact? You can quantify that when you're doing research, right? Is it a positive impact, or is it actually negative for you and Harvard? So you need to make sense of what the impact of such collaborations are. So as an international collaborating office or the international relationships head, you need to make sure you are getting into agreements or MOUs or collaborative part with the right impact, because that eventually again goes on to impact your rankings, right? I think we've been talking a lot about rankings and its impact. We've been doing this analysis over the last couple of years in terms of what is really the impact of different metrics, right? And I think one very, very important metric that stands out from our perspective is the collaboration between, the relation between international collaboration and field-weighted citation impact. And we keep coming back to these two metrics because the correlation aspect is as high as 0.9. So it kind of gives you an essence, how the, important it is to understand which metrics you want to focus on, right? Again, not just research output is going to help you push up your rankings, but how do you improve quality? International collaboration is definitely one aspect, right? Academic corporate collaboration is another aspect, which India is not really doing very well. Like Karthik mentioned, as per our data, it's only 0.8% at the moment. If I look at international collaboration in India, it's as low as 16%. What I've done as an exercise very recently is, I picked up, because we keep talking about BRICS, right? And that's the reason I've done that. I looked at the top ranked institutes from each of these countries, right? So I've picked up Brazil's top institute, which is, where is that? Yeah, University de Sao Paulo. I've picked up China Tsinghua University, which is ranked number 22 as per Times Higher Education. So what have these institutes been doing in terms of research metrics, right? So if I look at China's Tsinghua University, which is ranked number 22, it has a research output of around 41,000. I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers. I'm just going to be saying them. And in case you feel a little lost, just feel free to ask me once again. So they have a field-weighted citation impact of 1.15, so 15% more than the world average. If I look at the international collaboration, they're at around 31%. If I look at South Africa's top-ranked institute, which is University of Cape Town, which is ranked at number 156 as per Times Higher Education, they have a scholarly output of around 10,000, but they have an FWCI of 2. So 200 times better than the world average. And the international collaboration is 60%. Okay? Now, if I look at Russia's Lomonosov's Moscow State University, they have around 20,000 scholarly output, field-weighted citation impact of 0.93, and international collaboration of 34% again. Now, this is sort of an outlier, and I'll tell you why I'm saying that, right? If I look at Brazil's University de Sao Paulo, they have around 42,000 scholarly output, a field-weighted citation impact of, again, 1.15, international collaboration of around 37%. But now when I come to India, where we have Indian Institute of Science, which is among the top ranked in India, which is in the bracket of 251 to 300, mind you, has a scholarly output of only 8,000, a field-weighted citation impact of only 1.08, and an international collaboration of only 27.6%. Well, all the other top-ranked institutes are somewhere between 30 to 40%, and in case of University of Cape Town, it's as high as 60%. international collaboration in India is so low. And believe me, this is one of the institutes that is on the higher side of international collaboration, right? So I think this speaks volume in terms of, one area which Indian institutes can actually work upon in terms of improving their quality. This is kind of right there in front of you. You know what your strengths are internally. You've got that data with you. This is not, just theoretically driven. It is fact-driven, data-driven. You know what your areas of strength are. Identify the other institutes where you could kind of, collaborate with, take it up from there, and improve your international collaboration, which in turn affects your quality of your research output, right? And the reason I said again that Lomonosov's Moscow State University is an outlier is because its field-weighted citation impact is lower, although their international collaboration is higher. Now again, we could always get into the details of why the quality is lower, because probably they've got a different governing body, they've got, language is an issue. But I think, speaking of language, this is very important as well to highlight. India is so strong in English speaking, right? I mean, none of us would have an issue communicating when it comes to English in the higher education forum. Then why is it that we're still lagging behind in the international collaboration aspect? China, which actually does have a linguistic barrier, are doing much better. Brazil also has a linguistic barrier, are doing better in terms of international collaboration. Brazil as well. So what is holding us Indians back when it comes to international collaboration? Again, this is just one metric, and I think it is very important to understand this fact, right? You cannot just use one metric to kind of understand the research quality or the ranking metric, right? And you were talking about that as well. You need to have a couple of metrics or a basket of metrics to kind of take it to the next level in terms of understanding how your peers are doing so that you can take the reasonable size steps. You can't just jump over and over, right? So I think it's important to understand from different metrics. That's where benchmarking becomes important for everyone across different stakeholders, whether they're funding bodies or policymakers, in terms of, what are the right step sizes that you need to take.
If I can just ask
Sure.
a question. When you are saying international collaboration,
Yes.
does that matter that it is a collaboration between South-South or South-North only picks it up, like the developing nations collaborating with
No, of course.
If I could just interject right now, that's a great question, Deepak, and can we come back to that after, Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll remember to address your question later, definitely. But I think another stakeholder which I do want to emphasize upon is students, because I think at the end of the day, this is really important. And according to a survey, around 85% of the students do actually look at rankings. So whether you like it or not as an institute, you do have to cater to that audience, and you want to make sure that you are, reaching out to them. There is a lot of confusion in the market, again, in terms of different rankings. So you need to try and within the internal ecosystem work upon these different ranking systems which are there, right? In India, NIRF is key because funding is also now associated with it. Times Higher Education, QS have always been in the Indian market as well, not so much as the ARWU at the moment in India. So I think there are different, ranking agencies which are important in the Indian ecosystem, which have to be recognized and have to be worked upon these different metrics, right? Again, funding, like I said, have been associated with how you rank now. And I think that has been one of the major drivers in terms of pushing Indian institutes to kind of start figuring out in these rankings. So I think that's the right incentive to at least get the Indian university started. But I think this is something which has to come in from within and not from being external, drivers or external sources. I think, yeah, more or less, these are some of the stakeholders which I do consider important. I think Elsevier as a research solution partner is very key in terms of providing data, whether it is to universities, whether it is to policymakings, funding bodies, or ranking agencies. And we keep telling that during every visit, as authors, make sure your profiles are complete, because if you don't ensure your profiles are complete, it impacts the affiliation. If it impacts the affiliation, it impacts your ranking. If it impacts your ranking, it impacts your funding, right? So it's a vicious circle again, and you have to make sure you as authors are contributing your share into ensuring that you are there in the known environment. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tehseen. Plenty of lessons to be learned for our friends in the International Collaborations Office and our Rankings Office, and in fact, for all of our faculty members. Our last speaker for this panel, Dr. Yugang Goyal at the JSLH. I believe we're now looking at various parameters between QS and THE and how they compare. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Thanks a lot, Arjo. Thanks everyone for being here. It's indeed a pleasure for me to be here, because speaking on higher education, I was part of the founding team in Jindal University, so I learned about higher education through practice rather than through reading as much. And then I have been in close touch both with THE and QS, Karthik, for instance, since the beginning. So it's a pleasure indeed. This is part of my work that I've been doing and kind of, like most academics, doing and not doing and not doing. So it's been kind of held up there. And so I'll be really happy if I can get some insights from you about what I'm going to talk about. So overall, the conversations were great. And most of them, however, focused on the how of the ranking and benchmarking. I'm going to take a step back a little bit and start thinking about the why of it. For most of you who are aware of my association with Jindal's engagement in ranking organizations, so you know that I'm sympathetic to the cause of ranking, and my position remains so. I think it is extremely important for any, and part of the reason is because psychologically human beings are attracted to lists rather than to paragraphs, and therefore the success of doing business rankings, success of Human Development Index, Transparency, Hunger Index comes as a very important sort of precursor to the ranking of universities also. However, be that as it may, university rankings offer more of a signaling tool rather than telling us about the university as a whole. And I'll tell you why is that the case. So they're great tools. But in this process, in fact, Ritin, was great that you put out the list of some universities with their vision statements. You chose to highlight things that are definitely very important. But in some of them, and particularly Tsinghua that I noticed, the mission was not to create research and excellence. The mission was to advance Chinese society, right? Usually that's how missions of most universities are. And what happens is, and so I understand the value of that. So I'm not trying to sort of, devalue the importance of research and teaching. But let's put it in a very Aristotelian sense. What is the telos of a university? Why do we have universities to begin with? Do we have universities so that we have some people who can teach good and some people who can do great research? Well, yes, indeed. But why do they have to do that to begin with? So, really going down to the telos. And it looks like across scholarship of various disciplines, there's a crazy consensus on why do we have universities. It is to create moral societies. It's a very, very simple idea. We have to create ethical constructs in universities. We have to develop and build and cultivate citizenry. And in that, we agree, teaching, research, citation, etc. are very important. So in terms of, the idea is, of course, how do you estimate and measure what is, mottos of most universities in the world are not research and teaching. The mottos are, for instance, Harvard is, or for that matter, Jindal is, promoting public service. Or for Tilburg University, which I love personally the most, is advancing society. I mean, that's the motto of university, in which research and this is important. So it's very, very important, but let us not miss the forest for the woods, so that we don't come in, so that we do not have an impression that things which can be measured are the only things which are important. There are many things which can't be measured, which have to be important. Now, why am I saying this? Very, very quick sort of switch of gears. You've all heard of the very famous trolley problem, right? There's a trolley car going, there are 5 people in front, and the driver suddenly, the brakes have failed, and this driver has to decide whether he should turn the trolley to the next track. But the problem is there's one person standing there, right? Would you rather go straight and kill 5, or would you take a turn and kill one person who was on the other track to save those 5 people? It's a very famous philosophical problem discussing between consequentialism, sort of utilitarianism and categorical imperative, right? MIT Media Labs has recently started an experiment, they concluded the experiment, the results are in Nature, I mean the journal Nature. They have done trolley experiments online across 200 countries with more than 1 million respondents. And they have changed these, the question in such a way that you have to now, let's say this is a self-driven car. We're talking about self-driven cars, right? And the self-driven car sees an elderly man in front and a younger man on the other side. And it knows it cannot avoid the accident. How do you design the algorithm? Should it turn or should it not? You kill younger or older? Who do you kill? Do you kill the passenger? You try to save the passenger, or you try to save the pedestrian, right? And the third one was, do you try to do you try to kill, you kill more people or you kill less people, right? Now, these are philosophically very poignant questions. The interesting response, after several million iterations across several years, the last 4 or 5 years that they've done, is the following. That it really depends whether you will kill young rather than old, depending upon which country you come from, right? So, individualistic countries like French, Canadian, UK, US, Sweden, Germany are overwhelmingly going to spare the young, kill the old. Whereas countries like Taiwan, China, Korea, Japan, India was not part of the, for all kinds of reasons, you'd rather spare the old and kill the young, which is also going to be, pedestrians and passengers, however, so, but the interesting thing is this is not standardized, that individualistic countries will do something and collectivist countries will do something else. So for instance, in pedestrians, Japan, Norway, Singapore, Denmark, Finland, Korea, all of these countries would rather protect the pedestrians, whereas passengers would be protected by China. Why am I telling you all this, right? I mean, it doesn't have to do anything with the higher education. But it has got to do pivotally with higher education. Because higher education institutions are located in a particular cultural context. And there is a co-production of culture happening. Universities create some sort of cultures. They absorb some sort of cultures from the outside. And this constant intellectual and moral osmosis that takes place in a society, for all of this, universities are really those osmosis centers, in which research and teaching are very important. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot more to ranking and benchmarking, and in terms of, so what I did was, let's park this question aside, okay? What's going on with the rankings? So I would say that these are the outcomes, right? If there's good research, people must be thinking about morality also, right? There must be some sort of a culture. There must be a cultural construct which is going to be shaping up in a particular society, because university's location in a society is as much symbiotic as the society's location within around a university is. So in that sense, and there's some research happening on this, most African universities, or African research that comes out of Africa shows that rankings, etc., they create some sort of what we call a Cindrella effect in social psychology, which is that you have a stepfatherly or stepmotherly behavior towards many parameters which are not ranked, but you have a very, very dear relationship with those parameters which are ranked, or which are useful. And we did see both in Karthik's and Ritin's presentation the parameters which are ranked. To what extent are these parameters useful for the real soul, vision, and mission of the university is a question we can come to later. And I mean, this is a semester-long course, which would be we're discussing in half an hour, 1 hour. But even within those outcomes, the interesting thing is this. And some European universities, particularly La Sapienza, has engaged in understanding mathematically what is the difference in the outcomes. So if I look at QS, and if I look at ARW, if I look at Leiden, if I look at THE, their ranking is going to release some sort of names. Are they similar names, or are they very different names? That's the question. Because if they are similar names, then quite likely they are pretty much estimating similar ideas. And that should be the case, right? If they're all looking at a particular goal to achieve, barring a few changes here and there, they should all look similar. And here are some of the results that I want to discuss with you quickly. This is a graph of so you can take a look at it. So this is a score in the Times Higher Education ranking, and this is the percentile rank scores of the university. So each university has a score, and a percentile means that university who's at the top, you give 100 marks to that university, and every other university gets proportionate marks. Interestingly, the correlation is one for citations, right? But if you look at the teaching performance and research performance, around 90% of the universities have a score of less than 50. Right? Research performance is, by the way, the reputation survey that Times Higher Education conducts, right? Citation is obviously, and teaching is estimated through faculty-student ratio, and there are many other variables which many others on the table would know better. So in other words, your teaching and research is only taken care of by 50 marks is all that there is for 90% of the universities. This is a graph of your rank and your score, which is obviously has to be downward sloping, because the higher the rank, the lower the score, and the other way around. But look at the differences between, so let's look at Times Higher Education teaching, Times Higher Education research, QS academic reputation. We can go into the details, but the point is, each of these, they're fairly far away from each other. They're not really very close. But there is an interesting correlation, which means that there is something going on within these rankings. The next one, okay, these are correlation. So correlation coefficient, Spearman's correlation coefficient basically tell you how correlated two variables are. A value of 1 means they are exactly correlated. A value of -1 is they're exactly correlated, but in the opposite direction. And any other value, 0 means that they're not correlated, effectively, right? So I'm only going to focus, I mean, there are a bunch of other, ranking things, but you look at QS International student and Times Higher Education International. The correlation is 0.87, fairly high correlation, right? Please ignore this negative because it is student staff and staff student on the other side, so that's why it's negative. But this is only 0.13. Rho is the, 0.47. Rho is the coefficient I'm looking at. N is the number of countries I did this study with, right? So the correlation is half, not full, for this faculty-student ratio. And so I don't know why would that be the case, because it should be fairly similar, right? Faculty-student ratio is a specific number of each of these universities, which should not differ. International faculty and international academic staff, 0.13. So in a way, maybe there's a difference in the definitions. I'll go to some more interesting ones, or I can just come to this if I have time, because I might be. Oh my goodness. Okay. So let me skip this slide because it's more interesting than I want to show, because I'm running in short of time. This is telling you the correlation coefficient of research performance in various countries, right? Which means if you are in these countries, Canada, UK, India, USA, Chile, this is Australia, Korea, the correlation is high, so people would know. But if you are coming from universities, and I'm going to talk to you about Italy, Brazil, Netherlands in a bit. I'm sorry, this is not India. This has to be another country, because India was not part of this study. This is Indonesia. It could be Indonesia, yes. This is the citation versus the research performance. So research performance is academic reputation. When you ask, like Karthik was mentioning, you ask scholars around the world, do you think these are the top 10? And then there is citation. And this is a graph for Italy, and this is a graph for Netherlands. Why am I showing you these two countries? You see, in Italy, there is a high number of citations. These are all percentiles, but very low value in terms of research performance or in terms of reputation. In Netherlands, the reputation is higher. Now, clearly, most Italian universities don't figure in the minds of most of the scholars when they have to select top 10, but maybe Dutch universities do. So by virtue of which country you're located in often affects your research performance score, even though your citation score is equally or as high. I'm going to skip this as well. These are, this is the academic reputation and research performance straight line, but oh, okay, let me take this one. Yeah, top 10 universities. This is a QS ranking, and this is the Times Higher Education ranking, fairly similar, but look at the top Asian universities. In QS, Asian universities figure a much better rank rather than in Times Higher Education, right? For a variety of reasons. And similarly, if you look at
Look at Fudan. Go back, look at Fudan. 43 versus 155. That's a huge difference.
That's a huge, and this, by the way, from Times Higher Education, QS University's website. So it's so it's a fairly authentic. This is not a third-party research done. And look at this one. Number of universities represented in countries between QS and Times Higher Education. So in Times Higher Education has a higher representation from countries which you can call as sort of global north, or let's say the Western countries, and lower for countries like China, Korea, and Japan, for that matter. Now this was for illustrative purposes. I'd like to conclude. And I'll conclude with a thought, because I don't want to engage. I can't engage in it because I'm running in short of time, just a minute or so. If we think that the tools which reflect some sort of goals of a university, or what should a university aspire to be, if tools that reflect that goal are similar across both Times Higher Education and QS, then we should record a very high level of correlations, but we are not. Now, one can attribute this to the difference in the percentages weight that you ascribe to various parameters in Times and QH. And therefore, maybe there could be this difference. This is a research which I haven't done yet, so I don't know whether it is because of difference in the methodology, but overall these tools should give you the same result. If they are not, then we know that each tool, however mathematical it is, has some sort of a value judgment ascribed to it. Why should research be 40% and not 30% is a value judgment that THE has done or QS has done. If we are then okay with value judgments, then I think a more important step could be for particularly, let's say, universities around the world is not to use the same standard metric which is being used by QS and THE to compare universities in Bangladesh and United States of America. And also because the goal of the universities in both US and Bangladesh is dependent upon the cultural context in which they are located in. I'm not even using the word socioeconomic, right? And they're basically different cultures. It is important for us to know what is the male-female ratio amongst faculty and students in India, rather than knowing how many have gotten Nobel Prize, right? And so that's an important metric for us. Are we having more women students in our colleges? That may not be a very important metric for Canada or US possibly, because they have gone past that problem. They're still going through that problem. And as a culturally located entity, universities have to be mindful of it. So my proposal is this. THE and QS are great at what they're doing, but they're focusing on the outcomes which lead to some sort of a goal. The problem is this is becoming, the means are becoming the ends by themselves, but that's okay, I'll keep that aside. But they're focusing on the outcomes. To look at universities in various cultural contexts, which could be countries like India, Bangladesh, or it could be Latin America, Africa, you have to look at processes and not just outcomes. Democracy is a process and not an outcome. Now, estimating process is difficult, but it's not impossible. And to give you a quick example at which I will end, is none of the ranking organizations look at the governance as a particular process or an outcome to be estimated or ranked against. And a very simple metric of governance is simply the selection of the leader of the university or the dean of a school. How is this person selected? Karthik was mentioning about websites displaying only tenders. And the reason why they're displaying tenders is because the vice chancellor of public universities in India are chosen by the government in order to be sure that once the tenders are out, the tenders go to people who can then pay them money. Which is a problem American universities have solved by a very simple twist, which, by the way, exists in AMU and BHU. It's no longer because they've changed, is that you keep the alumni in your board, who will be able to then have a say in selecting your vice chancellors, for example, right? Because they are most, anyway, you get a sense of what I'm talking about. But governance particularly, for instance, which I could have talked about more if we had more time, is an important metric for many countries in developing part of the world, which would not be the case. And this is why the focus on process as a homegrown ranking metric, which emphasizes on processes like this, becomes more important in this context. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Yugang. Thank you to all the speakers. Yugang, this is a point that's been raised quite a few times, that perhaps THE and QS in particular, both of these agencies, don't take into account the quality of teaching, and instead are fairly more focused on research excellence, right? We now have about 13 minutes for questions. Before Rahul, Deepak, you had a question for Tehseen, which I'm sorry I had to cut short at the time. Would you mind raising that question now?
Thank you. The question was that when you say that international collaborations matter, does it matter that it's the collaboration between the global north, or say in BRICS, if I am collaborating with a university in South Africa versus if I am collaborating with a university in USA, where the amount of resources available, the amount of resources, not just human but financial resources available, are very different.
Yes.
So does that matter in?
I think the impact is different for different levels, right? If I look at the collaboration impact between India and US, believe me, it's not as high as it is between India and Mexico, for example. Although US is very high on resources, but it does not necessarily mean that the impact of your research output is also going to be high, right? Similarly, if I am from a department level, I think it becomes very important to kind of understand which department in a particular university is doing well, and then do my collaboration accordingly. So it is unbiased in that ways in terms of how you're collaborating. What really matters is the department or the subject level where you're collaborating, and that impacts your overall quality, but not at a country level in terms of if you're collaborating with US, it's definitely going to be a high impact. Not at all. Similarly, if I would say, I think India and Brazil also have a very high impact factor in terms of the quality of when they're collaborating. But again, if I break it down to university level, it would depend from university to university where you're collaborating. So it's really not a simple statement in terms of you have to collaborate with US. No, it has to be a more detailed decision in terms of which department, which subject you're collaborating in. I hope that addresses it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Rahul, you had a question, and then
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rahul. I'm Assistant Director in International Office. My question is to the any speaker who can answer on that. Generally, universities are often ranked using metrics for research income, academic impact, but they don't say too much about the quality of the life of researcher on those institutions. So my question is that, there is a possibility where we can add some new metrics in the current ranking system, metrics like happiness index, where we can check the quality of the researchers who are doing research under these, parameters. I mean, this is only the one factor which I would like to ask. There are n number of things of quality, because we are talking about the quality, and what I feel that this ranking parameter is making to keep in a mind student, so that we can bring more international students or national students to our university rather than bringing the good, faculty members. So if we add metrics like happiness, job satisfaction, and anything which is more related to human factor, what is going to be the impact of
Right.
current ranking system?
Thanks, Rahul. Maybe this question could be answered by Ritin, and then perhaps Karthik, you want to
And
come
this
in a
is,
bit?
this is my first question. Second to the
Oh,
THE, there is Mr. Phil, the editor of Times Higher Education. Once they said that the Times Higher Education don't, consider these kind of ranking parameter, but they are seriously thinking about to add this parameter. So did there is any kind of update from the THE side whether they add up, because these things happened on 2015, and now we are on almost 2019.
Yeah, so to answer your question, as I said, rankings are always a work in progress. So it's not like whatever was the parameters were designed initially are going to be set in stone. So in terms of incorporating new metrics, like you mentioned, the happiness index, that's something definitely we are always taking feedback from the academic community around the world. And last time we did a major revision was in 2010.
Yeah.
So we are looking at perhaps making few changes, let's say in next couple of years or so, because currently we are kind of aggregating the feedback at the global level. But the second side to it is also because we are looking not just at a country level, but at a global level. So the challenges do come into play in terms of the comparability of any chosen additional metric across the world. And second, of course, in terms of the accessibility of quantifiable data associated with that metric. So we have to take those factors into account before adding any new metrics.
Yeah. Perhaps.
I mean, just wanted to add, like, if you can just take an example of UAE. UAE is having the happiness project is running there. It is quantifiable. I mean, they can count the numbers of the same. If you talked about Bhutan, they have a happiness index. So they have some sort of number where they are counting the happiness and they are coming up rather than going on GDP side. So can
All right. Thanks, Rahul. Cut. Yeah.
so is it all about the money? I mean, that ranking? Yes.
Yeah, so as I said, we are looking at different frameworks for different aspects. So when I talked about the European teaching framework or the US excellence framework, we did incorporate the student survey as well, because one of the aspects we were looking at was in terms of the how well the institutes are able to utilize the resources, and taking the feedback from the students was one component. So we did run student surveys for that framework.
I mean, again, we are taking care of students because they are bringing money to the university, not about that researchers who are doing research. Because just because of this research as a big parameter, there is a huge pressure on the faculty and other people that bring out that research. They are not doing, I mean, I'm sorry
Okay,
to say, but
Rahul, we can continue this conversation offline as well, right? But Karthik, I want to hear from you as to student
I'll
and...
give Rahul an answer that he probably wants to hear. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. No, many years ago, I'm giving you a very short story. Many years ago, Khalid and others, we Indians used to use the bark of a tree and coal to brush our teeth. The British came in, they said this is very bad for health. Toothpaste is the best thing that you should do. Using tree and coal and all this is very harmful. Today, cut to 2018, every TV advertisement with every Indian actor gets into your home who says, "Kya aapke toothpaste mein namak hai?" Does your toothpaste have salt and coal and charcoal and haldi and turmeric and everything else? So they want to know, do you have all of this in your toothpaste? So 2018. That was about the 18th or the 19th century. Indian women were always beautiful, including our mothers, sisters, girlfriends, wives, etc. We had this Miss India and Miss World which came into India. There was no L'Oreal, no Garnier, no makeup. None of our women really used anything beyond haldi and turmeric and all of this. Suddenly you have L'Oreal and others coming in, making a big bang. We're a big bang conference room, making a big bang into India, using up the market. Today you have Africa, Venezuela, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Tunisia getting into the Miss World and Miss Universe. Suddenly, our mothers were always beautiful. So ranking agencies, in my opinion, are the East India companies who are coming in, who are telling you, all of you will have to do research. Research is extremely good for you. And suddenly when all of this is done and over, and with good respect to THE and QS, and I have been telling THE and QS about impact rankings in 2005 and 6, when they had not even thought of a BRICS. They had not even thought of a subject rankings. And the reason why our organization, iCare, was created is we told QS, look, your QS star rating speaks about having a swimming pool on campus, an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Our universities don't have water supply. We have more mobile phones in our country than toilets. Our schools don't have toilets. So they said we will never do anything that is very, very India-centric. QS has come up with the QS iGauge, where OP Jindal is a diamond rated institution for whatever that means. So things will change. You'll have to wait, be patient, and continues to engage with them, because they are also a for-profit commercial organization. Once they're satisfied with all that they have made, you supported their conferences, Khalid gives a lot of money to QS and all of that. So they'll come back and say, okay, now the Middle East, what I meant was, the Middle East spends a lot of money on QS and putting together conferences, etc. At some point in time, they'll start listening. The engagement will have to continue, and at some point in time, these things will change. For example, there's a parameter called staff with PhD, and I can give it to you in writing. At some point in time, we'll come back and say, okay, staff with PhD is okay, but PhD from where? So if I have university faculty who are PhD from the top 100 of your rankings, you give me a better score, as against PhD from a university in Bihar. So these kinds of micro pictures will have to evolve. We will have to engage with them to tell them, look, these are also the metrics for which we are collecting data. You may want to have a look at that, and things will change.
All right, thank you very much, Karthik. Anamika, you had a couple of questions.
Yeah, so my name is Anamika Srivastava, and I'm doing research on higher education. I'm associated with IIHED Jindal University. It's good that Karthik brought this up about websites, and I have, this is my primary research on websites, the thing that I'm going to say. Yesterday we were discussing about university social responsibility, and we were talking about different factors, etc., where university should respond to the society's need. Something that has emerged in the recent time is in the post-truth world, there is this, we've been overwhelmed with a lot of information, and somewhere universities' responsibility is also to educate their students in a way that they can differentiate between, there's this sensation vis-a-vis some substance. But what has happened is universities themselves have actually been trapped in this kind of, post-truth, activities. You were talking about marketing, etc. This is my primary research. I've looked at websites, and what I've found is that somewhere, all universities are not ranked. I mean, they are not capable of being ranked in these important agencies. What they're doing is they're playing around it. So the truth is, sweetened and massaged, and some sort of information is there, but that's not making sense. And by the way, my research goes into how students are reacting or responding to this. It's also very interesting, and people are talking about how it's very relevant to the students, but ranking have also become irrelevant to the students somewhere, because they've understood that these claims are just freely floating signifiers which have no meaning. There are other ways, and I would like to point out some of the ways. Like one student said that they're no longer looking at these claims. They look very pretentious to them. Even the ranking, they know the problems with the ranking parameters. What they rely on is something like, they have this Facebook groups of students who study in these institutes. They would like to know from them what is happening, what's the placement scenario, and that's the way they are taking decision at the margin. Okay, so some of the positionalities are helping them to give them the larger picture, but then these are the nuanced ways. Quora is very important for them. So they're looking at Quora, they're looking at all these discussions. So I think somewhere the ranking is, so there's a culture that has come up, but the culture is somewhere, it's nebulous. It doesn't have any form, it doesn't have a kind of a guiding, proper proper, you're talking about strategies, but we don't have strategies. Markets are responding. You use the term market. You used it. So markets are responding, marketers are responding to it. But academics need to respond and resist. Thank you, Yugang, for that. Yeah.
The chair was waiting for the question.
I was actually. No, that's fine, but that actually raises a very, very important question. That is, rankings, much like other industries, moving towards an aggregator model rather than a top-down ranking agency model. So when you mentioned Quora and you mentioned Facebook, and perhaps there's much like Zomato and Airbnb and Uber have been disruptors in their various fields, are we waiting for a crowdsourced ranking system which is yet to come up? Perhaps with that, we can call the session to a close a little ahead of time.